I'm doing a new segment gaining trying out a new one. It's called Movie Monday Couple Review. It's full of spoilers. Today, couple is... You guys might ask me, why am I doing a review on this couple? I reply with, I don't care if it's old. I'm gonna do reviews on movies I watch. When we first meet Evie, she's a librarian and also had ruined many books by accident. Dr. Terrence Bay, Evelyn's employer, came in furious at the damages done, asking ruefully why he had hired Evelyn to begin with. Evelyn defended herself by citing her qualities of reading hieroglyphs and being able to catalog items properly. But Dr. Bay stated that she only had her job because her deceased parents were the library's finest patrons, leaving Evelyn to straighten out the books, regardless of time or effort. At that moment, Evelyn heard a sound coming from a display area where mummies and sarcophagi were kept. Taking a torch into the room, Evelyn peered into one sarcophagus, which saw a rotted mummy pop out shrieking at her. The mummy was simply controlled by her brother Jonathan, who stopped by to see her, demanding that he leave, as he would likely ruin her career the way that he had been ruined. Evelyn denied that Jonathan was succeeding in finding artifacts, Jonathan being an archaeologist as well. Evelyn was cross also due to the rejection of her application to work with the scholars of Bembridge, who attested that she had little experience in the field. Jonathan brought a trinket along that Evelyn at first derided as worthless, as most of his findings were forgeries, but which turned out to be a real find, a small golden puzzle box with 8 keyed ends. Taking the box to the curator for further studying, Evelyn showed Dr. Bay the map, stating that if her research was correct, that the map led to the lost city of the dead, Hamunaptra. Dr. Bay derided the notion while he examined the map, only to mistakenly expose the map to a lit candle on his desk. The map was put out by Evelyn and Jonathan, but the section with the lost city was burned off, Dr. Bay replying that it was for the best, as others had gone seeking the ruins of Hamunaptra, with none ever finding it. But Evelyn would have none of it and, taking the map and Jonathan, headed out the door. Evelyn had learned that her brother had obtained the puzzle box, not on a dig in Thebes, as he had claimed, but from the pocket of a drunk at a seedy bar known as the Sultan's Kasbah. The drunk in question was subsequently arrested and placed in Cairo prison, where Evelyn and Jonathan had gone to find him, led by the warden, Gad Hassan. Stopping at one cell, Hassan stated, when asked about the man's crime, that he did not know what the charges were, but that the prisoner was just looking for a good time. Bringing the prisoner forward, the guards revealed an American man named Richard O'Connell, a former corporal in the French Foreign Legion, who revealed to Evelyn that the box that he had found and been relieved of was found at Hamunaptra. Jonathan suggested that O'Connell was lying, at which point the American recognized Jonathan as the man who stole his box and, in response, punched Jonathan in the face. Evelyn then asked if O'Connell was actually at Hamunaptra and asked him if he could tell her how to get there. O'Connell signaled Evelyn to come closer so that he might whisper it to her, kissing her full on the lips and telling her to get him out of prison. With that, O'Connell was beaten by the guards and taken away. Evelyn asked the warden where it was that the American was being taken. The answer was that he was being taken to be hanged soon after. Jonathan pointed out that the Foreign Legion had no jurisdiction in Egypt, and so could not have the man hung. The warden replied to the Carnahans that for a cut of the profits made from the Legion, the prison relieved them of the duty of extradition at the time of O'Connell's hanging. Evelyn attempted to bribe the warden with various amounts of money, none of which appealed to the warden as he ordered O'Connell hung. Finally, Evelyn revealed that O'Connell knew the location of Hamunaptra the warden was disbelieving at. first, but soon after agreed to spare O'Connell's life. On the condition that the warden received 25%, Evelyn agreed, and O'Connell's life was spared. Evelyn and Jonathan met at Giza Port, wondering if O'Connell would show up to take them on their journey. As Evelyn spoke on about how unreliable he seemed, O'Connell turned up, shaven, trimmed, and in clean clothes. In awe, Evelyn stood taking in the sight of O'Connell's new appearance before regaining her cool composure, and asking if the search that they were about to conduct for Hamunaptra was not some money-making scheme devised, to which O'Connell replied the truth. His garrison believed in Hamunaptra so much that they, without orders, marched across Libya to find the ruins, finding only death. With that, O'Connell walked aboard, taking the Carnahan's bags for them and leaving Evelyn to stare on, fixated at his looks. At that moment, the warden of Cairo prison walked up to Evelyn, who was dismayed to see the warden, who declared that he was going along with them so as to protect his investment. That night, Evelyn and the 3 others in her group sat at a dinner table aboard the riverboat Sudan, with other passengers saying nothing of their mission to the others at the table. Later on in the evening, Evelyn sat down at a table reading a novel by candlelight when O'Connell found her. He spoke with her about her true intent behind going to Hamunaptra, which Evelyn revealed she intended to find the fabled Book of Amun-Ra, the ancient golden book that contained the texts and archaic incantations of the old kingdom of Egypt, the idea that sparked her interest in Egypt as a kid. Her life's pursuit is to find the book and prove its existence. O'Connell then asked if the book is crafted from pure gold made any difference to her. The question, which Evelyn was impressed to hear, demonstrating that O'Connell knew his history. Changing the subject, Evelyn wished to know why O'Connell had kissed her back at the prison, to which O'Connell replied that he was about to be hanged and it seemed like a good idea at the time. Evelyn, cross at having heard this, stormed off angrily, but stood by, petting some camels nearby. That night, as Evelyn brushed her hair and tried to read a book, her mind still wandered to O'Connell kissing her, and, trying to convince herself to forget about it, she continued to brush her hair, dropping her book. When Evelyn picked it up and looked into the mirror, she saw a scarred man in dark robes that had a hook-shaped blade, where his right hand was standing behind her. The man held her at the point of his blade and demanded to know where the map was. Evelyn, fearing for her life, pointed to the table behind him where the map lay. The man then demanded to know where the key was, and Evelyn asked what key he was talking about, at which point O'Connell, guns drawn, burst into the room to face the assailant. The man in black took Evelyn behind his blade, threatening to kill her. When 2 other men dressed in black appeared from the portholes of the ship, O'Connell blasted those men away, as Evelyn jammed a large candlestick into her assailant's eye. Evelyn ran out through the halls but stopped when she had remembered that she left the map, and ran to get it back. O'Connell took her away from the burning room, as he was the map to Hamunaptra. On deck, more men dressed in black began to fight against the boat's guests, and O'Connell joined in the fight, blasting down as many of the black robe-swathed men as he could. Evelyn met O'Connell on deck, and when asked if she could swim, Evelyn replied that she could if the time called for it, which served as O'Connell's cue to throw Evelyn overboard, so that she might escape the burning boat. Evelyn, along with the other passengers aboard the Sudan, made it to shore, complaining that they had lost everything from tools to equipment, and Evelyn's wardrobe as well. But she, Jonathan, O'Connell, and the warden made it to shore well enough, finding help the next morning. Jonathan's money supply survived the swim, and so he managed to buy some camels for the group, while Evelyn had gone into a tent where she purchased a dark blue Bedouin gown complete with a veil. Evelyn's new outfit caused O'Connell to look on with even more interest than before. The four then continued their journey to Hamyonaptra, Jonathan complaining about the camels all the while as Evelyn responded that she found them adorable. The travelers continued on until the evening, when they all stopped to camp out before rising in the early morning. Evelyn, being cold in the desert night, huddled up with O'Connell as they slept, but returned to her own sleeping spot before her brother and the warden saw and got the wrong impression. The journey continued the next morning, with Jonathan and Warden Hassan arguing about who was snoring, their quarrel stopping once the group's camels walked past a section of sand where many human skulls and bones were, O'Connell knowing some of the deceased men there. Further on, O'Connell's group had met up with Benny Gabor's group, which consisted of Benny, another former legionnaire, 3 treasure-seeking Americans, their Egyptologist consultant, and a large number of native fellahin diggers. As both groups stood facing one another, one of the Americans, Henderson, reminded O'Connell of a wager that he had placed, entitling whichever group reached Hamyonaptra first to $500. O'Connell told Evelyn to get ready for the sunrise, for it would show the way to Hamyonaptra. Indeed, as the sun rose, it illuminated the ruins of the city of the dead, causing all present to drive their mounts in a race to reach the ruins first. Evelyn drove her camel faster and faster on and reached the city before any others did, earning her group $500. Evelyn and her group had set up camp within the ruins, intending to enter the underground tunnels of the ruins by using a tunnel near a statue of the god Anubis, which was partially below ground, and was said by the scholars at Dembridge to be the location of the Golden Book of Amun-Ra. She had used several ancient mirrors around the entrance of the tunnels as part of a trick that she knew of, and was then given a small brown leather kit by O'Connell, who inarticulately revealed that it was a gift. Evelyn opened the kit and smiled with joy as she found several tools. She stated that they were standing inside a chamber that no one had entered in 3,000 years. As she turned one of the mirrors inside the chamber, illuminating the room with light from the sun, identifying the chamber as a sonneture, Evelyn explained that the room was once used for preparations for the afterlife, where mummies were made. The group moved on through the corridors, stopping as they heard a loud chattering sound coming from the walls, a sound like insects. After the group had gone through the corridors further, they found the statue of Anubis partly sunken into the ground with the top half on the surface, and were about to search for the compartment when they heard echoing voices coming from around the statue. O'Connell, Jonathan, and Warden Hassan pulled out their guns, ready to face whatever was causing the voices, and found the 3 Americans, Egyptologist Benny, and a number of native diggers. The Americans were as frightened by the smaller group as the smaller group was afraid of the Americans and had drawn out their guns along with Benny. Burns, seeing Evelyn's toolkit, called out that it was his but retracted his claim once O'Connell pointed his pistol towards him. Evelyn tried to send the larger group away but could not, as both groups continued pointing pistols at one another. As the hostilities continued, Evelyn surreptitiously towed some pebbles into a crevice on the ground, seeing that another chamber was below them. She gripped O'Connell's arm, telling him, "There are other places to dig." They surrendered the statue base to the Americans. Evie, O'Connell, and Jonathan moved to the lower chamber and began to pry at the ceiling, Evelyn telling that according to the hieroglyphs, they would come up between the statue's legs. Jonathan continuing the idea by remarking that they could steal the Golden Book from under the statue while the Americans were not paying attention. Evelyn remained adamant that they could find the compartment, assuming that the Americans hadn't found it first. After some time had passed, the 3 took a short rest. Jonathan amused himself by hitting away at pebbles with a pickaxe, as though they were golf balls. and Evelyn regaled O'Connell with the process of mummification. As they talked, Jonathan hit one pebble that jarred loose a large stone object from the ceiling, which came crashing to the floor, a sarcophagus that was buried at the base of Anubis, indicating that whoever was entombed was either someone of great importance or that he did something very naughty. As Evelyn had put it, the sarcophagus was closely examined and was observed to have a lock on it of some kind that appeared octagonal as the puzzle box that Jonathan had done, which Evelyn herself had pocketed from him as she remarked that earlier. The hooked warrior on the riverboat was searching for a key, placing the key on its lock. Evelyn showed that the key pertained to it, the notion being interrupted when a scream ran out from the corridors. Warden Hassan had been clutching at his head, tearing at his scalp, and shoved Evelyn, Jonathan, and O'Connell out of the way as he ran screaming into a stone wall, ending his life. That night, Evelyn examined the late warden's body, noting that it had some form of bite on its foot, though his cause of death still remained unknown. As O'Connell pointed out that the 3 American treasure seekers had deaths as well. 3 of their diggers were burned to death with salt acid that erupted from the statue base of Anubis. As O'Connell and Jonathan pondered the notion of Hamunaptra truly being cursed, Evelyn derided the notion entirely, stating that if she could see it and touch it, it was real. O'Connell responded with a cock of his elephant gun that he believed in being prepared, while Jonathan decided to look in the late warden's bag, finding a broken bottle of 12-year-old Glenlivet, whiskey and sand, the apparent remnants of the items taken by the warden. The sound of far-off hoofbeats came from the dessert, and O'Connell left the siblings to investigate as Evelyn tried to follow him. A band of Medjay warriors had come storming into the camp, tearing down tents, killing diggers, and terrorizing O'Connell, the 3 Americans, and the others. O'Connell helped Evelyn up, showing true concern for her, and heard the American treasure seekers insist that the treasures of Seti must be under the sands for the warriors to protect them so. O'Connell replied that the Medjay were desert people that would value water over gold and would be less interested in keeping treasures for themselves. Burns suggested then that the groups could combine forces at night and simply be rivals instead of being enemies. That night, after O'Connell, Evelyn and Jonathan had all taken some of the late warden's whiskey. O'Connell attempted to give Evelyn an impromptu boxing lesson, which was hindered by her drunkenness after having taken some whiskey. Shortly after, Evelyn drunkenly explained her motives for finding Hamunaptra. Egypt was in her blood. Her father, being a famed explorer, had married an Egyptian woman and sired Evelyn and Jonathan. O'Connell responded that her story explained her parents and Jonathan, but her motives still were not clear. Evelyn went on to stagger to her feet and proclaimed that she was no treasure seeker, explorer, or another adventurer, but that she was proud of being a librarian. Evelyn then tried to kiss O'Connell, but passed out due to the drink. The next morning, the trio were none worse for the wear, turning their attentions instead towards the opening of the sarcophagus that they had found. Evelyn expressed her joy at the opening of the sarcophagus, as she had hoped to open one since she was young. As the lid was being opened, Evelyn noted that the sacred spells had been chiseled off, condemning whoever was inside into the next life as well. The lid was pried open, causing a mummy to burst out due to the pressure of the air inside its sarcophagus. The mummy was noticeably moist even after 3,000 years and still decomposing. She examined the lid of the sarcophagus, where an inscription was made with fingernails by the condemned mummy when he was still alive. The message stated death is only the beginning. That night, Evelyn examined the coffin further, finding scarab exoskeletons inside. She was about to take them to her campsite and show them to her fellows, When she looked in Dr. Chamberlain's tent and saw that he had the Book of the Dead, Evelyn explained to Dr. Chamberlain that he would need a key to open the book. Evelyn explained that, according to her research, the mummy that had been found suffered the Hamdai, a curse reserved only for the worst blasphemers, never used by the Egyptians of the time because they feared its effects, those with the Hamdai, would bring back the 10 plagues of Egypt. As Dr. Chamberlain slept that night in his tent, he held on to the Book of the Dead and a canopic jar. Evelyn, knowing that he had the Book of the Dead with him, snuck into his tent and took the obsidian book from him while he was asleep, taking the book back to her own campsite. She sat in front of the fire with the book as O'Connell lay awake. Pretending to be asleep, O'Connell pointed out that she was stealing the book. But Evelyn replied that according to O'Connell and Jonathan, it was borrowing. Wondering what it was, O'Connell was informed that the book was the Book of the Dead, not the Book of Amun-Ra, which he believed it was, using the puzzle box that Jonathan owned. Evelyn opened the book's locked covers. Evelyn looked on the obsidian pages and saw hieroglyphs, which she began to read aloud so as to translate them to O'Connell. Not knowing that as she spoke the words, the mummy that she, Jonathan, and O'Connell had found below in the tunnels was coming to life, roaring loudly as it awoke. Dr. Chamberlain had also awoken, screaming out at Evelyn that she must not read from the book. Just then, a droning sound began, coming from the horizon, awaking all the others in the campsite as they looked onto the distance outside the camp. A vast horde of locusts that swarmed onto the camp, covering up tents and those that could not run away fast enough, including Dr. Chamberlain, who stood in silent shock. To escape the locusts, O'Connell, Evelyn and Jonathan reached a hallway where O'Connell stated that the locusts were one of the 10 plagues that Evelyn had brought up before. But Evelyn replied that the grasshoppers of Egypt occasionally reached massive numbers, resulting in their swarms. With that, the floor had become covered in frogs at once. Evelyn offered no explanation for that occurrence, for soon after, in another corridor, a large sandy mound erupted from the floor, and swarms of scarabs came bursting from the sand. The scarabs chased the 3 explorers through the halls, as O'Connell threw a torch at them and fired at the insects, scattering them somewhat. But the scarabs finally chased the 3 in separate directions, O'Connell and Jonathan reaching a stone platform, away from the scarab's path, while Evelyn reached what she thought was a wall, actually a trapdoor that took her into another chamber before sealing itself. Evelyn, in shock, stepped backward and beheld a walking mummy. The same mummy, in fact, that she had helped find. Screaming in terror, Evelyn stepped back, petrified at the sight of the moving corpse, which squinted at her with Burns' torn-out eyes, licking its dried chops with Burns' tongue. He referring to Evelyn as Anksunaman. Evelyn, backed up against a wall, saw the mummy speak to her in ancient Egyptian, offering its hand. Just then, O'Connell ran into the chamber to get Evelyn back but stopped in shock when he saw the mummy. The mummy then saw Jonathan, Daniels, and Henderson as they stumbled onto the scene and roared loudly, which O'Connell reciprocated by blasting the mummy into with his elephant gun, buying them all enough time to run away. As the expeditionaries all ran up to the campsite, they came face to face with the Magi, who had already taken Dr. Chamberlain captive. Their leader, a warrior named Ardith Bey, declared that they had all done a serious damage by awakening the mummy that he and his people had feared. Ardith Bey replied that no mortal weapons could kill the creature, as it was not of this world. To Magi then brought Burns forward. The man's eyes and tongue had been ripped out, and his companions angrily blamed the Magi, but Ardith Bey stated that they had saved him, commanding the expeditionaries to leave Hamunaptra before the creature killed them all, as both teams and their diggers left the ruins. Evelyn noted that Dr. Chamberlain still had the Book of the Dead and his canopic jar with him, and the decision was made to let him simply keep it. 2 days later, both expeditions and their diggers reached Fort Britain in Cairo and stayed in the guest quarters within the fort, speaking to no one of their experiences. For the next set of days, the expeditionaries stayed in their quarters, slept, and came out only to have meals. O'Connell tried to convince her to skip town with him before the mummy could find them, but Evelyn insisted that they must stop the mummy, for his curse would spread further once he was reborn. O'Connell reminded Evelyn that he signed on to her expedition for something different. He was only meant to take her to the deserts and to bring her back. Having done that, contract was terminated, and he told her that she could either come along with him and leave town or stay behind to fight. Evelyn decided that she would stay, and O'Connell, with nothing else convincing to say, left her quarters. O'Connell had come back to Evelyn after having seen the plagues manifest themselves, as waters turned to blood and hail and fire fell from the skies, decimating Cairo. As the pair stood outside Evelyn's residence, Benny appeared running down a staircase. O'Connell caught him for a moment, but lost him once Benny had run away, having heard a loud roaring sound. O'Connell and Evelyn then ran upstairs to see that Burns was dead, having been drained of his organs and fluids, and at the end of the room stood the mummy himself, who was regenerating his flesh as it crept up his bones. The mummy then strode towards O'Connell and Evelyn, Jonathan, Henderson, and Daniels having entered the room as well. The four men opened fire on the mummy, their bullets having no effect on the corpse as it shoved O'Connell out of the way into Jonathan, Henderson, and Daniels. The mummy then went on towards Evelyn, thanking her for bringing him back from the underworld, and trying to kiss her until Evelyn's cat Cleo showed up, frightening the mummy away as it turned into a small sandstorm and burst out of the window. Only one man could give Evelyn sufficient answers, her employer, Dr. Bay, who she went to see in the museum, along with O'Connell, Jonathan, Henderson, and Daniels. The group reached Dr. Bay, but the curator was already speaking with another man, the Medjay warrior Ardith Bey. Evelyn demanded to know what Ardith Bey was doing in Cairo, and Dr. Bey sardonically asked whether they'd like to know, or if they would prefer to just shoot him and Ardith Bey. The others lowered their guns and listened. Dr. Bey and Ardith were part of a secret society that guarded the city of the dead for over 3,000 years, to ensure that no man could find the remains of the former high priest Imhotep and bring him back to life. Because of Evelyn's mistake in reading the Book of the Dead, it was revealed that the mummy feared cats because they were the guardians of the underworld, and he would fear them until he was fully regenerated, at which point he would fear nothing. Evelyn then pointed out that at Hamianaptra, Imhotep had called her Anksunamen and tried to kiss her. Dr. Bey revealed that it was due to Imhotep's love for Anksunamen that he was cursed, and that after 3,000 years, he was still in love with her. Dr. Bey theorized that Imhotep would try to bring his lover back from the dead, and that Evelyn was likely his intended human sacrifice. But Ardith Bey observed, looking up at the skylights, that Imhotep's powers were growing as the sun was being blocked by the moon, one of the plagues. Returning to their quarters, Evelyn asked the two remaining Americans who were present when the chest was opened, only Burns, who had been killed, Daniels, Henderson, and the Egyptologists were present. Benny ran off before the chest was opened. Evelyn stated that they must find the Egyptologist. Evelyn was displeased at being left behind, but could do nothing about it, as she was picked up by O'Connell, left in her room, and locked in. O'Connell ordering the two Americans to guard the door so that no one would go in or come out. Nell then left with Jonathan to find the Egyptologist, but they were too late, as the mummy had claimed the Egyptologist's life as well. Imhotep, then almost fully regenerated, became sand and sifted in through the keyhole of Evelyn's door, materializing at her bedside. Evelyn was asleep, having nightmares. When Imhotep closed his eyes, imagine his lover, and kissed Evelyn as she slept. Evelyn screamed, muffled, as the mummy's rotting jaws touched her lips when O'Connell and Jonathan burst into the room, stopping Imhotep, who hissed words in ancient Egyptian when O'Connell held Evelyn's cat to the creature, scaring the mummy away as he burst out the window in a sandy cloud. Alright, that's the end of my video. I might do a part 2 for this video.